The smell of sawdust and machine oil had become my sanctuary, a welcome change from the synthetic odors of meth labs and fentanyl-cutting houses that had filled my nostrils for the past 15 years. I never thought retirement would come at 38, but a bullet through my shoulder and another through my thigh during a raid in Albuquerque had convinced both me and the DEA that I'd earned my early exit. Now, 6 months into civilian life in Henderson, Nevada, I was rebuilding vintage motorcycles in my detached workshop, trying to forget the faces of the dealers we'd put away and the partners I'd lost along the way. My name is Henry Kovacs, and I thought moving to this quiet subdivision called Desert Springs Estates would give me the peace I needed. The HOA paperwork had been extensive during closing, but my real estate agent assured me it was standard stuff. Keep your lawn green, don't paint your house purple, don't park boats in the driveway. Simple enough. I didn't have a boat, my house was a respectable beige, and I'd hired a landscaping service to handle the yard work since bending over to pull weeds still made my thighs scream. The workshop had sold me on the property. The previous owner had been a woodworker, and the 1,200-square-foot detached building at the back of my half-acre lot was climate-controlled, well-lit, and had enough electrical capacity to run serious equipment. I'd spent the first month after moving in converting it into my dream motorcycle restoration space. The day I got my 1972 Triumph Bonneville running again was the first day since getting shot that I'd felt truly alive. Everything was perfect until I met Brenda Hutchinson. She showed up on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after I'd moved in. I was in my garage, not the workshop, rotating the tires on my truck when a white Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway and blocked me in. A woman in her mid-50s emerged, wearing white capri pants, a salmon-colored blouse, and oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive angular bob that seemed to be the universal uniform of a certain type of suburban warrior. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you Henry Kovacs?" I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Hutchinson, president of the Desert Springs Estates Homeowners Association." She pulled off her sunglasses and fixed me with pale blue eyes that had all the warmth of a January morning in Wyoming. "We need to discuss several violations." My stomach sank. Violations. She produced a tablet from her enormous purse and began reading. "On October 3rd, your trash bins were visible from the street until 11:30 a.m. Bins must be returned to the side yard by 10 a.m. on collection day. On October 10th, there was a grease stain on your driveway measuring approximately 8 inches in diameter. On October 15th, your grass height measured 3.2 inches. Maximum allowable height is 3 inches. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You measured my grass." "I take my responsibilities as HOA president very seriously, Mr. Kovacs. This is a premier community with standards to maintain. These violations carry a total fine of $450. $450 for grass that was 0.2 inches too tall. Each violation carries a $150 fine as outlined in the CC and Articles you signed when purchasing your property. The notices will be mailed to you, and payment is due within 30 days. Additionally, I need to inspect your workshop." The word "inspect" triggered every defensive instinct I'd honed over 15 years in federal law enforcement. "Excuse me, your workshop. I've received complaints that you're running a commercial business from your property, which is strictly prohibited in residential zones. I need to verify that you're not in violation of Code 17B. "Complaints from who?" I've barely spoken to anyone in this neighborhood." Brenda's smile was thin and humorless. "The HOA board receives anonymous complaints through our website. We're not at liberty to reveal the source." "Now, shall we proceed with the inspection?" "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "You're not searching my property without proper cause and notice." Her expression shifted to something between surprise and indignation. Nobody apparently said no to Brenda Hutchinson. "Mr. Kovacs, the HOA covenants give the board the right to inspect properties to ensure compliance with community standards." "Then, email me the proper request, and we'll schedule something with reasonable notice." "But you're not going through my stuff on a whim because some neighbor complained. I had a motorcycle delivered last month." The Triumph parts had arrived on a flatbed, and I'd spent the better part of a Saturday unloading them with a hand truck. It was the most interaction I'd had with my immediate neighbors, who'd watched from their windows like I was putting on a show. Brenda's face flushed. "This is highly irregular. Most homeowners appreciate what the HOA does to maintain property values." "Most homeowners probably don't get shaken down for $450 over grass height. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I turned back to my truck, dismissing her. I heard her huff, and her expensive shoes clicked rapidly across my driveway. The Lexus door slammed hard enough that I was surprised the window didn't crack. She backed out with more aggression than necessary, her tires squealing slightly on the pavement. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. The fine notices arrived by certified mail 3 days later. Each violation was itemized with photographs. Brenda had apparently driven by my house with a camera, documenting every microscopic infraction like she was building a federal case. The photos were time-stamped and annotated. My trash bins at 11:32 a.m. My grass measured with what looked like a ruler placed in the lawn. The oil stain on my driveway circled in red marker on the printed photo. I called my real estate agent, Monica, who sounded apologetic but unsurprised. "Henderson HOAs can be pretty aggressive," she admitted. "But Brenda Hutchinson has a reputation even among other HOA presidents. She's been sued twice by homeowners. Both cases settled out of court." "What were the suits about?" "One was harassment. The other was something about her entering someone's backyard without permission to photograph their pool equipment." "Look, Henry, my advice is to pay the fines and stay off her radar. Pick your battles. People who fight the HOA in Desert Springs usually end up moving." I didn't like that advice. I'd spent 15 years not backing down from drug dealers, corrupt cops, and cartel enforcers. Letting a suburban tyrant push me around felt like surrendering something essential. But I was also tired. Tired of fighting, tired of conflict, tired of the constant tension that had defined my professional life. Maybe Monica was right. Maybe I should just pay the extortion money and keep my head down. I wrote the check that evening, my hand cramping with resentment as I signed my name. 2 weeks passed quietly. I worked in my workshop most days, losing myself in the meditative practice of motorcycle restoration. I'd started on a 1969 Honda CB 750, a project that would take months, but promised to be spectacular when finished. The work was detailed enough to occupy my mind without triggering the PTSD that still occasionally blindsided me. The sound of metal on metal no longer reminded me of gunfire. The smell of chemicals no longer brought back memories of drug labs. My workshop had become my therapy, more effective than the mandatory counseling the DEA had provided after the shooting. On a Thursday afternoon, I was deep into disassembling the Honda's carburetor when my phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Henry Kovacs?" a woman's voice, older, uncertain, speaking. "My name is Dorothy Palmer. I live 4 houses down from you, the blue house with the white shutters. I saw what Brenda Hutchinson did to you with those fines, and I thought you should know she's planning something." I set down my tools and gave her my full attention. "What kind of something?" She was at the HOA meeting last night, going on and on about your workshop. "She's convinced you're running some kind of illegal business. She showed pictures she'd taken of your motorcycle parts delivery and claimed the truck violated the commercial vehicle restrictions. Henry, she's obsessed. I've lived here 8 years, and I've seen her do this to other people. She picks someone and just doesn't let go until they sell and leave." "Why are you telling me this?" Dorothy sighed. "Because it's wrong. Because someone needs to stand up to her, and because you're a veteran, aren't you? I saw the Marine Corps flag you had up in your garage that first week. My son served. He died in Afghanistan. I don't like seeing veterans harassed. My flag had come down after Brenda's first visit. I'd taken down anything that might give her ammunition. I appreciate the heads up, Dorothy. What's she planning exactly?" "She said she's going to do a compliance check this weekend while you're out. She knows your schedule because she's been watching your house. She mentioned you leave every Saturday morning around 9. My blood went cold. "A compliance check? You mean she's planning to trespass on my property?" "She has keys to every house in the development. It's in the HOA rules that we had to provide copies for emergencies. She's used them before to enter homes when owners are on vacation to check for water leaks and such. But Henry, she has no right to go into that workshop." "That's not part of your house." "No, it's definitely not." My mind was already working through the implications and my options. "Dorothy, thank you for warning me. Can I ask a favor? If you see her come onto my property this weekend, would you call me immediately? I'll do better than that. I'll record it on my phone. My grandson taught me how to use the video camera. It's about time someone had proof of what she does." After hanging up, I sat in my workshop considering my options. I could confront Brenda directly, but that would reveal Dorothy as my source and potentially make things worse for her. I could change my Saturday routine and stay home, catching Brenda in the act. Or I could set up cameras and document everything, building a case the way I'd built cases against drug operations for 15 years. The investigator in me, the part that hadn't retired even if my badge had, chose the third option. I drove to an electronics store in Las Vegas and spent $800 on a comprehensive security camera system. 6 wireless cameras with motion detection, cloud storage, and smartphone alerts. I spent Friday installing them around my property, focusing particularly on the workshop. 2 cameras covered the exterior doors, 1 covered the side entrance, and I placed 1 inside aimed at my main workbench. That workbench currently held my disassembled Honda carburetor, various tools, shop manuals, and my old DEA badge and credential case. I'd had them out earlier in the week when filling out some retirement paperwork. The badge sat on the corner of the workbench, the gold shield catching the overhead lights. I'd been a special agent for 12 years before the promotion to supervisory special agent for my final 3 years. That badge represented everything I'd been, all the good I'd tried to do, and all the costs I'd paid for wearing it. I almost put it away, then decided against it. If Brenda did trespass, let her see exactly who she was messing with. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect Nevada weather that made desert living worthwhile. Clear blue skies, temperature in the low 70s, dry air that felt crisp and clean. I made a show of leaving at my usual time, climbing into my truck and driving out of the neighborhood. Dorothy's blue house showed signs of life, and I saw curtains move in her front window as I passed. Instead of heading to my usual Saturday destination, the veterans' breakfast meet up at a diner in Boulder City, I drove exactly 1 mile away and pulled into a shopping center parking lot. I opened the security camera app on my phone and waited. The motion alert came at 9:27 a.m. Camera 3, which covered my driveway, showed Brenda's white Lexus pulling up to my house. She parked and looked around carefully before getting out. She was dressed more casually than during her first visit, wearing jeans and a plain navy blouse, like she was trying to be inconspicuous. She walked quickly to my front door and appeared to try the handle. Finding it locked, she produced a key from her pocket. My front door key, the one I'd been required to give the HOA for emergencies. She disappeared inside, and for 10 minutes my interior cameras tracked her movement through my house. She walked through the living room, peered into the kitchen, and even opened my bedroom door. The violation of privacy made my hands clench around my phone, but I forced myself to stay calm and let the cameras record everything. She exited through my back door, which led to the yard and my workshop beyond. Camera 5 picked her up as she crossed the lawn toward the large metal building. She tried the workshop door and found it locked. This lock was different, a heavy-duty commercial deadbolt that the previous owner had installed. The HOA had never asked for this key because the workshop wasn't considered part of the primary residence structure. I watched Brenda's face cycle through frustration and determination. She pulled out her phone and made a call, speaking to someone I couldn't hear. The conversation lasted about 2 minutes. Then she walked back to her Lexus, opened the back, and retrieved a canvas bag. She returned to the workshop door, and my screen went dark on camera 5 for a moment before coming back online. When the image returned, Brenda was kneeling by the door with what looked like a lock-pick set. I was already starting my truck. The drive back to my house took 3 minutes, but I forced myself to approach quietly. I parked on the street instead of pulling into my driveway, not wanting to alert her. As I walked up the side yard toward the workshop, I could hear the scratching of metal on metal as she worked on my lock. The door swung open just as I rounded the corner of the building. "Find what you're looking for," I asked. Brenda jumped so violently she dropped the lock-pick set. Her face went white, then red, then white again in rapid succession. "Henry, I thought you were out, clearly. Want to explain why you're breaking into my workshop?" She straightened up, trying to recover her composure. "This isn't breaking in. As HOA president, I have the authority to inspect properties for code violations. You refused my reasonable request for access, so I exercised my emergency inspection rights. With a lock-pick set, that's interesting emergency equipment. The lock was stuck. I was trying to help. The lock works fine. You were committing burglary, Brenda. That's a crime." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't burglarize a property you have administrative access to. Now, since I'm here, I'll conduct the inspection." She pushed past me into the workshop before I could stop her. I followed, my phone still recording in my pocket, letting her dig herself deeper. The workshop was well lit, and my current projects were clearly visible. The Triumph sat on a lift in one corner, gleaming chrome catching the light. The Honda parts were spread across my main workbench. Shelves lined the walls, holding tools, manuals, spare parts, and supplies. And sitting on the workbench, right next to the Honda's carburetor, was my DEA badge. Brenda saw it the same moment I remembered it was there. She froze mid-step, her eyes locked on the distinctive gold shield. I watched the color drain from her face again as she read the letters. Special Agent, Drug Enforcement Administration, Department of Justice. "That's not real," she said, but her voice had gone thin and uncertain. I walked to the workbench and picked up the credential case, flipping it open to show my ID card alongside the badge. My photo, my name, my position. Retired was stamped across it, but everything else was official and legitimate. 15 years as a DEA agent, I said quietly. 12 years in the field, 3 as a supervisor. Retired on medical disability after I took 2 bullets during a raid on a fentanyl distribution ring in Albuquerque. I moved here for peace and quiet, thinking a nice suburban neighborhood would be a good place to work on motorcycles and try to forget about drug dealers and criminals. Brenda's hands were shaking. I didn't know. Why would you? You never asked what I did for a living. You just decided I was violating HOA rules and needed to be punished. Now you've committed several crimes. Breaking and entering at minimum. Possibly burglary depending on whether the prosecutor thinks you intended to steal anything. Definitely trespassing. You can't prove I picked that lock. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app, turning the screen so she could see the recorded footage. 6 cameras covering my property, all motion activated, all uploading to cloud storage. I have you entering my house with an unauthorized key, going through my rooms without cause, and then picking the lock on my workshop. The cameras are admissible in court. I know because I've used security footage to convict dozens of criminals. She sank onto my workshop stool, and for the first time since I'd met her, Brenda Hutchinson looked small and scared. Please don't arrest me. I can't arrest you. I'm retired, but I can call the Henderson Police Department and file charges. They take burglary seriously, especially in nice neighborhoods like this. This is a misunderstanding. I was just doing my job as HOA president. Your job doesn't include breaking into locked buildings. Your job doesn't include going through my house when there's no emergency. Your job definitely doesn't include picking locks. Brenda, you crossed about 6 different lines today, and I have it all documented. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. It wasn't pretty or delicate crying. It was the ugly, desperate crying of someone realizing they destroyed their life through their own actions. I'd seen it before, usually right after we'd arrested dealers who suddenly understood they'd be spending the next 20 years in prison. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I did feel tired. Why do you do this? I asked. Dorothy Palmer told me you've harassed other homeowners until they moved. What do you get out of it? Brenda wiped at her face with shaking hands. I don't know. Control, purpose. I spent 30 years as a real estate attorney before I retired. My husband left me for his dental hygienist 4 years ago. My kids live in California and call twice a year if I'm lucky. The HOA gave me something to do, something to care about, and I'm good at it. Property values in Desert Springs have increased 18% since I became president. Because you bully people into keeping perfect lawns and hide their trash cans on time. That's not accomplishment, Brenda. That's tyranny with a homeowners association charter. I know, she whispered. I know that. But if I'm not the HOA president, who am I? What do I do with my days? The question hung in the air between us. I understood it better than she knew. I'd asked myself similar questions after retiring from the DEA. Without the badge, without the mission, without the purpose that had defined my adult life, who was Henry Kovacs? The motorcycle restoration had been my answer. Brenda had chosen something more destructive. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to resign as HOA president immediately. You're going to return every set of keys you've collected from homeowners, and you're going to admit to the HOA board that you've been abusing your position. You're going to personally apologize to every homeowner you've fined or harassed, and the HOA is going to refund those fines. All of them. They'll never agree to that. They will when I show them the video of you committing burglary. And Brenda, if you don't do exactly what I'm telling you, I will file criminal charges. I'll testify in court. I'll bring my full credibility as a retired federal agent to bear on your prosecution. You'll be convicted, and at your age, even a year in county jail will feel like a death sentence. Her face crumpled again. You're destroying my life. No, you destroyed your life the moment you decided that picking my lock was acceptable. I'm giving you a chance to fix some of the damage you've caused and maybe find a better purpose than terrorizing your neighbors. Take the deal, Brenda. It's better than you deserve. She stood on unsteady legs and walked toward the workshop door. At the threshold, she turned back. I really was just trying to help maintain the community. No, I said. You were trying to feel powerful. There's a difference. She left without another word. I watched through the cameras as she got into her Lexus and drove away, her movements mechanical and defeated. Then I sat down in my workshop and took several deep breaths, letting the adrenaline fade. My hands were steady, my mind clear. I'd handled the confrontation well, fallen back on my training, stayed in control. But I realized I was done with Desert Springs Estates. The peace I'd sought here was permanently compromised. Brenda would either do as I demanded or she wouldn't, but either way, this neighborhood was tainted now. Dorothy Palmer called me an hour later. I saw everything. Well, not inside your workshop, but I saw her going in and then you arriving, and then her leaving looking like death warmed over. What happened? I gave her the summarized version, leaving out some of the more personal elements of my conversation with Brenda. Dorothy listened with the occasional intake of breath or murmured exclamation. Good, she said when I finished. It's about time someone put her in her place. What do you think she'll do? If she's smart, she'll resign and try to minimize the damage. If she's not, I'll be filing criminal charges Monday morning. Either way, thank you. On behalf of everyone she's harassed over the years, thank you. The call waiting beep interrupted us. Unknown number. I told Dorothy I'd call her back and switched over. Mr. Kovacs, this is Robert Chen. I'm the vice president of the Desert Springs Estates, HOA. Brenda Hutchinson just called an emergency board meeting for tonight and mentioned your name. I thought you should know. What did she say exactly? Just that there had been an incident regarding an inspection of your property and that the board needed to meet immediately to discuss potential legal implications. She sounded pretty shaken up. I made a decision. Mr. Chen, what time is that meeting? 7 o'clock at the community center. It's technically an executive session, just the board members, but given that you're the subject of discussion, I think you have a right to be there. I'll be there. And Mr. Chen, bring a laptop or tablet. I have some video I think the board needs to see. The Desert Springs Community Center was a modest building near the development's entrance, featuring a small gym, a meeting room, and a kitchen for neighborhood events. I arrived at 6:55, carrying my laptop and a folder with printed stills from the security footage. My credentials were in my pocket, not because I thought I'd need to prove who I was, but because carrying them had become a habit over 15 years. The meeting room held a conference table with 8 chairs. 5 were occupied when I entered. Robert Chen was a trim Asian man in his 60s, wearing business casual and looking concerned. Next to him sat a younger woman with dark curly hair who was introduced as Sarah Matthews, the secretary. 2 other board members, whose names I immediately forgot, occupied chairs on the far side. And at the head of the table sat Brenda Hutchinson, looking composed and professional in a way that immediately put me on guard. Mr. Kovacs, she said coldly, this is a closed board meeting. Homeowners aren't permitted to attend executive sessions. Mr. Chen invited me, given that I'm the subject of tonight's discussion. Unless you'd prefer I wait outside while you discuss me without my input. Robert gestured to an empty chair. Please sit, Henry. Brenda, let's hear from both sides before we make any decisions. I sat, placing my laptop on the table but not opening it yet. Brenda had a folder of her own, and I could see photographs peeking out from it. She'd come prepared for battle. This meeting was called, Brenda began, to address a serious situation involving Mr. Kovacs and his flagrant disregard for HOA regulations. Earlier today, I attempted to conduct a routine compliance inspection of his property after receiving multiple complaints about possible commercial activity. Mr. Kovacs became verbally aggressive and threatened me with false criminal charges in an attempt to intimidate me from performing my duties. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Sarah was taking notes on a laptop. Robert was watching me, waiting for my response. Is that your version of events? I asked calmly. That's what happened, Brenda insisted. Furthermore, Mr. Kovacs has been uncooperative from the beginning, refusing reasonable inspection requests and creating a hostile environment. I recommend we begin fining him $100 per day until he complies with HOA regulations and allows proper inspection of his workshop facility. Brenda, Robert said carefully, that seems excessive. What exactly is he violating? She opened her folder and produced printed photographs. These pictures show commercial motorcycle parts being delivered to his property. The delivery truck itself was a commercial vehicle parked in a residential driveway for over 3 hours, which violates Code 12C. The quantity of parts suggests he's running a motorcycle repair business, which violates residential zoning. When I attempted to verify this through inspection, he refused access and made threats. The photographs circulated around the table. They were, I had to admit, fairly damning if you didn't know the context. The flatbed truck did look commercial. The motorcycle parts did look like a lot of inventory. If I were running a business, this would be reasonable evidence. May I respond? I asked. Robert nodded. Please. I opened my laptop and loaded the security footage. Brenda is correct that I refused her initial request to inspect my workshop. That's because I'm not running a business. I restore vintage motorcycles as a hobby. The parts she photographed are for 2 personal projects, a 1972 Triumph Bonneville and a 1969 Honda CB 750. Both are classic bikes I'm restoring for my own collection. You can't prove you're not selling them, Brenda interjected. Actually, I can. I'm happy to provide financial records showing 0 business income from motorcycle sales. I'm happy to show my tax returns, but that's not the real issue here. I turned the laptop screen so the board could see. The real issue is that Brenda didn't just request an inspection today. She committed several crimes. I played the footage. The board watched in growing discomfort as Brenda entered my house with a key, walked through my rooms, and then picked the lock on my workshop. I'd edited the footage down to the most relevant moments, but it was damning. When I paused on a clear shot of her kneeling with the lock pick set, Sarah gasped audibly. That's not what it looks like, Brenda said, but her voice had lost its conviction. Then what is it? Robert asked. His tone had shifted from neutral to cold. Because it looks like you broke into Henry's workshop. The HOA covenants give me the right to inspect properties. They give you the right to request access with reasonable notice, Sarah said, still staring at the laptop screen. And only to areas covered by the HOA, which doesn't include detached structures not mentioned in the original covenants. Brenda, did you seriously pick someone's lock? The lock was malfunctioning. I was trying to help. I played another segment, this one with audio. Brenda's voice came through clearly as she spoke on the phone. The door is locked and he's not here. Do you still have that lockpick set I borrowed last year? Never mind, I found mine in the car. The room fell silent. Robert looked at Brenda with something close to disgust. Who were you talking to? That's taken out of context. Brenda, Robert said heavily, I think you need to resign, effective immediately. You can't force me to resign. I'm an elected board president. Then I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove you for cause. All in favor. 4 hands went up immediately. Only Brenda's stayed down. Robert's expression was grim. Brenda Hutchinson, you are removed as HOA president and from the board of directors, effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA documents, keys, and property in your possession by Monday morning. Brenda stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is illegal. I'll sue all of you. I'll sue the HOA. And I'll definitely sue you, she pointed at me, her voice rising to a near shout. You're just a washed-up cop who couldn't hack it anymore. You probably got shot because you were incompetent. You don't belong in this neighborhood. The words should have hurt, but they just bounced off. I'd heard worse from drug dealers facing life sentences. Brenda, I'd stop talking if I were you. You're currently on video making defamatory statements in front of witnesses. And for the record, I wasn't a cop. I was a DEA special agent for 15 years. There's a difference. She grabbed her folder and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. I'm so sorry, Robert said. I had no idea she was doing things like this. Has she done this before? Entered properties without permission? According to Dorothy Palmer, yes. She's apparently used the emergency keys to enter homes before. I suspect if you ask around, you'll find other homeowners who have had similar experiences. Sarah was still taking notes. We need to do damage control. If she's been violating homeowners' privacy, the HOA could be liable. We could be sued into bankruptcy. I'm not interested in suing, I said. I just want to restore my motorcycles in peace. But you might want to consider returning all the fines she's issued over the past few years. Some of them were pretty clearly bogus. Robert nodded slowly. We'll review every fine issued during her tenure. And we'll send a letter to all homeowners apologizing for the overreach and offering to return their keys if they want to provide new ones only to people they trust. Henry, is there anything we can do to make this right with you? Honestly. Just leave me alone. I'll maintain my property, keep my grass at 3 inches or below, and hide my trash cans on time. But I don't want surprise inspections. I don't want harassment, and I don't want someone documenting my life with a camera and a ruler. You have my word. The new board will take a much lighter touch. We're here to maintain common areas and organize neighborhood events, not to police how people live in their own homes. We shook hands, and I left feeling better than I had in weeks. The drive home was peaceful, the night air cool and clean through my truck's open windows. My house was dark and quiet when I arrived, the workshop standing sentinel at the back of the property. I almost went inside to bed, but decided to check the workshop first. Some instinct, some remnant of my training, told me to verify everything was secure. The lock Brenda had picked was still functional but had scratches around the keyhole now. I'd need to replace it. Inside, everything looked undisturbed. The Triumph gleamed under the overhead lights. The Honda parts were still spread across my workbench. And my DEA badge sat where I'd left it, the gold shield catching the light like it had earlier that day. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, remembering everything it represented. The good arrests, the bad moments, the friends lost, the lives saved. 15 years compressed into a piece of metal and leather. I'd earned the right to carry it, and I'd earned the right to retire from it, but I was apparently still carrying it in other ways. The confrontation with Brenda had felt natural, falling back into investigator mode, building a case, executing a strategy. Maybe you never really retired from being a federal agent. Maybe it became part of who you were, like learning a language or mastering a skill. You could set it aside, but you never completely forgot it. My phone rang, shattering the quiet. Unknown number again, but local. I answered cautiously. Henry Kovacs, a man's voice, official sounding, speaking. This is Detective Mark Williams with the Henderson Police Department. We've received a report from Brenda Hutchinson claiming you assaulted her, made threats, and falsely imprisoned her this afternoon. I need you to come down to the station to give a statement. My stomach dropped. So Brenda had decided to go on the offensive. It was a desperate move, but it could still cause me serious problems if she was convincing enough. Detective, I have security camera footage that shows exactly what happened. Miss Hutchinson broke into my workshop after picking the lock. I confronted her about it but never touched her, never threatened her, and definitely never imprisoned her. She left voluntarily after I explained I would file charges if she didn't resign from the HOA. Silence on the other end. Then, you have video of her picking your lock. Crystal clear footage from multiple angles. She also used an unauthorized key to enter my house first. It's all recorded and uploaded to cloud storage. Can you bring that footage when you come in? And bring any documentation you have of your relationship with Miss Hutchinson. HOA letters, emails, anything relevant. I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning. Detective, before you hang up, you should know I'm retired DEA, Special Agent, 15 years. I'm familiar with how these investigations work and I want to cooperate fully. His tone warmed slightly. Appreciate that. Federal agent to local cop, off the record, how bad is the footage? She's clearly committing burglary, multiple violations. If I were still active duty and this was a suspect in one of my cases, I'd be writing an arrest warrant. Wonderful. So I get to arrest a HOA president on a Sunday morning. My favorite thing. If it helps, she's not the president anymore. The board removed her tonight. That actually does help. Makes it less political. All right, Mr. Kovacs, I'll see you tomorrow morning around 9. Henderson Police Station. Ask for me at the front desk. I spent the evening organizing my evidence. The security footage was already backed up to 3 different cloud services, so even if Brenda somehow got access to my system, she couldn't destroy the proof. I printed out the fine notices she'd sent me, made copies of the security camera timestamps, and wrote out a detailed timeline of our interactions. Habit made me thorough. 15 years of building cases against smart, well-funded criminals had taught me that documentation was everything. Defense attorneys could spin stories, create doubt, confuse juries. But solid evidence, properly preserved and presented, was almost impossible to overcome. I also called my former supervisor at the DEA, Marcus Richardson, who'd retired 6 months before me and now did security consulting in Phoenix. We'd stayed in touch, checking in every few weeks to compare notes on civilian life. Marcus had adapted better than me, finding purpose in running his own business and spending time with his grandkids. "Henry," he answered on the second ring, "please tell me you're calling about something fun and not about trouble. Define trouble." He sighed dramatically. "What did you do?" I explained the situation with Brenda, the break-in, the confrontation, and now the false police report. Marcus listened without interrupting, making occasional thoughtful noises. "So you've been in retirement for 6 months, he said when I finished, "and you've already got a suburban HOA president arrested for burglary. That might be a record. She's not arrested yet, but she probably will be after the detective sees the footage. And she filed a false report claiming you assaulted her. That's going to add charges. Henry, you know you did everything right here, yeah. You documented everything, you didn't escalate physically, you gave her a chance to resolve it without criminal charges. This is textbook de-escalation and evidence preservation. I know, but it still feels like I can't escape the conflict. I moved to Henderson to get away from all this, and somehow I'm still building cases and dealing with criminals. HOA presidents who break into workshops aren't exactly cartel enforcers, but I get what you're saying. Listen, you need me to come up there. I can be in Henderson in 4 hours. The offer touched me more than I expected. No, I'm good. Just wanted to talk it through with someone who'd understand. Call me after you meet with the detective. And Henry, for what it's worth, I'm glad you haven't lost your edge. Some guys retire and go soft, stop paying attention, stop protecting themselves. You're still sharp. That's a good thing. I wasn't sure if it was a good thing or not, but I thanked him and hung up. Sleep came eventually, though I woke twice from dreams about the Albuquerque raid. Not nightmares exactly, just memories replaying with the vividness that trauma could bring. The sound of the door breaching, the shouts, the sudden muzzle flash, the impact of bullets hitting my body armor and then finding the gaps. Morning arrived with bright sunlight and birdsong, nature's indifference to human drama. I dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, the closest thing I had to professional attire these days. My retirement credentials went in my pocket along with my driver's license. The laptop and folder of evidence went into a messenger bag. The Henderson police station was a modern building on Water Street, all glass and concrete and professional landscaping. I arrived early and waited in my truck, watching officers and civilians come and go. The familiar rhythms of a police station were oddly comforting. This was a world I understood, rules I knew how to navigate. Detective Williams turned out to be a compact guy in his 40s, with the solid build of someone who'd played football in high school and stayed in shape afterward. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing me with the professional suspicion of a good investigator. "Mr. Kovacs, thanks for coming in. Let's talk in my office." His office was a small space with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in case notes and commendations. A photo of a wife and 2 teenage boys occupied a spot on his desk. He offered me coffee, which I accepted, then settled in behind his desk with a legal pad. "Before we start, I want to be straight with you," he said. "Miss Hutchinson came in last night and filed a report claiming you physically blocked her from leaving your property, threatened her with your federal credentials, and said you'd have her arrested on false charges if she didn't resign from the HOA. Those are serious allegations. Assault, intimidation, abuse of authority. None of that happened. I have footage that proves it. Let's see it." I opened my laptop and walked him through the complete sequence of events. Brenda using the key to enter my house, her walking through my rooms, the lock picking, my arrival and the confrontation in the workshop. I'd set up a second camera inside the workshop that morning after Dorothy's warning, a small unit that I'd hidden on a high shelf aimed at the door. It had captured everything, including audio. We watched in silence as the scene played out. Brenda entering without permission, me asking why she was there, her explaining about the inspection, me refusing and asking her to leave, her departing on her own, no physical contact, no blocking the door. "I never touched her," I said, "never threatened her physically. I did tell her I would file criminal charges if she didn't resign and make amends to the homeowners she'd harassed. But that's not a threat. That's me explaining the natural consequences of her criminal actions." Detective Williams replayed several segments, taking notes. "This is pretty clear-cut. She committed burglary, breaking and entering, trespassing, and probably a few other charges. And now she's filed a false police report trying to frame you for assault. What happens next? I write up the charges and send them to the DA's office. They'll review and decide whether to prosecute. Given the video evidence and the false report, I'd say it's almost certain she'll be charged. Probably a plea deal eventually, conditional discharge or probation if she has no priors. She won't do jail time, he shrugged. Probably not for a first offense. But she'll have a record, community service, fines, probation conditions. Her life gets significantly harder. He leaned back in his chair. Tell me about your DEA career. 15 years is a solid run. I gave him the summary. Started in San Diego working border cases. Transferred to Phoenix for 5 years handling distribution networks. Promoted to supervisor and moved to Albuquerque for the final 3 years. The shooting that ended my career. The medical retirement. Albuquerque, he said thoughtfully. That was the fentanyl task force raid, right? I read about that. 4 agents wounded, 2 suspects killed, biggest fentanyl bust in New Mexico history. That's the one. I was the second agent through the door. Took rounds from a guy with an AK-47 who'd been cooking product for 18 hours straight and was paranoid beyond reason. How long was your recovery? 8 months of physical therapy. Another 6 months of psychological evaluation before they'd medically retire me. The doctors said I could probably return to duty eventually, but I'd lost a step. When you're kicking doors on drug houses, you can't afford to be a step slower. So I took the retirement, moved to Nevada and started rebuilding motorcycles. And ran straight into a HOA president with a God complex. Apparently, I can't catch a break, he grinned. You did good work here, preserving evidence and handling this by the book. A lot of guys in your position would have lost their temper and made things worse. You stayed cool and let her hang herself. 15 years of practice. We wrapped up the interview with me signing a formal statement and providing copies of all my evidence. Detective Williams assured me he'd keep me updated on the case's progress. As I stood to leave, he stopped me. One more thing. The HOA board called this morning asking about filing charges against Miss Hutchinson for abuse of authority and misuse of HOA resources. They want to know if criminal charges are appropriate. What did you tell them? That they should consult a lawyer about civil remedies. But between you and me, if she's been doing this to multiple homeowners, there might be a pattern of behavior that constitutes harassment or stalking. If other victims come forward, the charges get more serious. I thought about Dorothy Palmer and the others Brenda had apparently driven out of the neighborhood. I know at least one other person who'd be willing to file a complaint. Dorothy Palmer, she lives on my street. Have her call me. The more victims we document, the stronger the case. I left the station feeling lighter than I had in days. The evidence was submitted, the official report filed, and the wheels of justice were turning. Brenda had tried to intimidate me into silence and failed. She tried to frame me for assault and failed. Now she'd face the consequences of her actions. My phone rang as I reached my truck. Dorothy Palmer's number. Henry, are you all right? I heard police cars at Brenda's house this morning. I'm fine. Detective Williams is handling the case. Dorothy, he said you should call him if you want to file a complaint about Brenda entering your house without permission. He's building a case about her pattern of behavior. Oh, I definitely want to file a complaint. She came into my house last year when I was visiting my daughter and went through my bedroom. I only knew because my neighbor saw her and told me. Brenda claimed she was checking for water leaks, but there were no leaks. She was just snooping. Call Detective Williams. The more victims who come forward, the more likely she faces serious consequences. After hanging up with Dorothy, I drove home and spent the afternoon in my workshop. The triumph needed attention, and working with my hands helped process the stress of the past few days. There was something meditative about adjusting carburetors and cleaning spark plugs, the mechanical simplicity of it all soothing in a way that few other things were. My phone buzzed with occasional texts throughout the day. Marcus checking in to see how the police interview went. Robert Chen informing me that 3 other homeowners had contacted him about Brenda's unauthorized entries into their properties. And finally, around 4 in the afternoon, Detective Williams confirming that Brenda Hutchinson had been formally charged with burglary, criminal trespass, and filing a false police report. The charges carried potential jail time, though Williams reiterated that first-time offenders usually got probation. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, giving the prosecution time to build their case and giving Brenda time to find a lawyer and probably realize how badly she'd messed up her life. I should have felt satisfied. Justice was being served. The bad guy was facing consequences. But instead, I felt tired. Tired of conflict, tired of drama, tired of being involved in legal proceedings even as a victim and witness. This wasn't why I'd retired. This wasn't the peace I'd been seeking. The next few weeks passed quietly. The HOA board sent out a letter to all homeowners apologizing for Brenda's overreach and announcing new policies limiting board authority. They'd review and refund questionable fines. They'd return all emergency keys to homeowners and only accept new keys on a voluntary basis. And they'd implement a formal complaint process with oversight to prevent future abuse. Dorothy Palmer became something of a neighborhood hero for speaking out against Brenda. She organized a coffee meeting at her house where several of us who'd been harassed shared our stories. It turned out Brenda had been systematically targeting certain homeowners, particularly those who were single, elderly, or new to the neighborhood. People she thought wouldn't fight back. I attended the coffee meeting, mostly to listen. A retired school teacher named Frank had been fined repeatedly for his lawn, even though he'd hired the same landscaping service that maintained Brenda's own yard. A young couple, Tom and Jennifer, had been cited for parking violations that were completely imaginary. An elderly widow named Margaret had received threatening letters about her porch furniture being the wrong color, something that wasn't mentioned anywhere in the HOA covenants. The stories painted a picture of sustained harassment and abuse of power. Detective Williams eventually added additional charges of harassment and stalking after interviewing everyone. Brenda's defense attorney tried to argue that she was simply enforcing HOA rules zealously, but the video evidence and multiple witness statements made that defense untenable. 6 weeks after the break-in, Brenda's court date arrived. I'd received a subpoena to testify, though the prosecutor's office told me they probably wouldn't need me unless Brenda decided to take it to trial. Most expected her to accept a plea deal. The courtroom was in the Regional Justice Center, an imposing building in downtown Las Vegas. I arrived early, wearing a suit for the first time since my retirement ceremony. My credentials were in my pocket, though I wouldn't need them. I was here as a victim and witness, not as a federal agent. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 30s named Amanda Chen, possibly related to Robert Chen from the HOA board, though I never asked. She'd reviewed all my evidence and called me 3 days before the hearing to go over my potential testimony. "Your video evidence is airtight," she'd said. "Defense counsel knows they can't win at trial. We're offering a plea deal. 2 years supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, restitution to you and the other victims, and mandatory psychological counseling. She'll have a conviction on her record, but no jail time." That seems light for burglary and filing a false police report. It is light, but she has no criminal history, and the victims are all asking for restitution and accountability rather than incarceration. Judge Martinez tends to favor rehabilitation for first-time offenders. If Brenda violates probation, she'll serve the suspended sentence, which would be 18 months. I'd agreed to the plea deal, as had the other victims. We weren't vindictive. We just wanted Brenda stopped and some acknowledgement that what she'd done was wrong. The courtroom was less full than I'd expected. Brenda sat at the defense table with her attorney, a tired-looking man in his 50s who'd probably handled 1,000 similar cases. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the circumstances. She'd lost weight, and her expensive clothes hung loosely. Her hair was still that aggressive angular bob, but the color looked faded, like she'd stopped maintaining it. Judge Martinez was a Hispanic woman in her 60s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. She reviewed the charges, confirmed that Brenda understood them, and asked how she pleaded. "Guilty, Your Honor." Brenda's voice was barely audible. The judge had her repeat it louder. Then Amanda Chen outlined the plea agreement. Judge Martinez listened without expression, occasionally consulting the documents before her. When Amanda finished, the judge looked directly at Brenda. "Miss Hutchinson, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting to breaking into Mr. Kovacs's property, filing a false police report, and harassing multiple residents of your neighborhood?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that if you violate any terms of your probation, you'll serve the suspended sentence of 18 months in county jail?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why did you do it?" The question surprised everyone, including Brenda's attorney, who looked like he wanted to object but didn't know what to object to. Brenda's hands twisted together in her lap. "I don't know. I thought I was helping the community. I thought enforcing the rules strictly would maintain property values and keep the neighborhood nice. But I went too far. I let the power go to my head. I invaded people's privacy and treated them unfairly. I'm sorry." The apology sounded sincere, though I'd heard enough false remorse from criminals to be skeptical. Judge Martinez seemed to be considering it carefully. "Miss Hutchinson, I'm accepting the plea agreement. 2 years supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and you'll pay restitution to each of your victims as outlined in the agreement. Additionally, you're prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position during your probation, and you're to have no contact with any of the victims except as required for restitution payments. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank your victims for being more forgiving than you probably deserve. You violated people's homes, their privacy, their sense of security. That's serious, Miss Hutchinson. Use these 2 years to figure out who you want to be, because the person you were before this arrest was heading towards something much worse." The judge banged her gavel, and it was over. Brenda was escorted out by her attorney, and Amanda Chen came over to shake my hand. "Thanks for your cooperation. The video evidence made this case airtight. What happens to her now? She reports to her probation officer next week, starts community service, and begins paying restitution. The psychological counseling is mandatory. Hopefully, she gets her act together. If not, she'll violate probation and serve time." I left the courthouse feeling like I'd finally closed a chapter. Brenda Hutchinson was no longer my problem. She was the court's problem, the probation department's problem, her therapist's problem. I could go back to my workshop and my motorcycles and my quiet retirement. The drive back to Henderson took 40 minutes through midday traffic. Las Vegas sprawled around me, an unlikely city in an impossible desert. sustained by ambition and air conditioning and the Colorado River. I'd come to appreciate the desert in the months since moving here. The spare beauty of it, the way the landscape revealed itself in subtle colors and textures once you learned to look. My house appeared unchanged when I arrived, but it felt different somehow. Lighter. The weight that had settled over my property during Brenda's harassment was gone. I could pull into my driveway without tensing up, wondering what new violation she'd invented. I could work in my workshop without worrying about unauthorized inspections. Dorothy Palmer was in her front yard when I pulled in and she waved me over. I walked down the street to where she was deadheading roses, her garden gloves dirty but her expression pleased. "How did it go?" she asked. "Plea deal. 2 years probation, community service restitution. No jail time." "Good. I'm glad she's getting help rather than just punishment. She clearly has some issues to work through." Dorothy pulled off her gloves and looked at me seriously. "Henry, I want to thank you, not just for standing up to her, but for doing it the right way. You could have made her life much worse, but you showed restraint and gave her a chance. That's character. I just wanted her to stop. You got more than that. You got her removed from power, you got the HOA to change its policies, and you got justice for everyone she'd harassed. That's not nothing." We talked for a few more minutes about neighborhood gossip and the upcoming HOA elections. Robert Chen was running for president on a platform of minimal interference and maximum transparency. He'd probably win unopposed. Desert Springs Estates was entering a new era, one where the HOA actually served the homeowners instead of the other way around. Back in my workshop, I returned to the Triumph. The bike was nearly finished, just some final adjustments to the timing and a thorough detailing before I could take it for a test ride. Working on it felt natural again, without the underlying tension that had been present for weeks. My DEA badge still sat on the workbench, though I'd moved it to a shelf after the confrontation with Brenda. Looking at it now, I felt the familiar mix of pride and loss that retirement brought. I'd been good at that job. I'd made a difference, saved lives, removed poison from communities. But I'd also paid the price in bullets and trauma and relationships that never quite worked because I was always chasing the next case. Marcus Richardson had told me once that retirement wasn't about stopping. It was about redirecting, finding new purposes, new challenges, new ways to contribute. The motorcycles were part of that. Maybe there were other things too. Dorothy had mentioned that the local high school had a shop class that was struggling for funding and volunteer instructors. Maybe I could teach kids about mechanics and restoration. Give them a skill and a purpose the way the DEA had given me one 20 years ago. The Triumph's engine turned over on the first kick, settling into a smooth idle that made me grin. Everything was balanced, tuned perfect. I let it run for a few minutes, listening to the distinctive British parallel twin rumble, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard from the grapevine that your HOA thing got resolved. Drinks next time I'm in Vegas," I texted back. "Absolutely. And Marcus, thanks for being there. Even from Phoenix. Always, brother, that's what partners are for. Partners." I'd had 3 different partners during my DEA career. 2 had transferred to other offices, and 1 had died during a raid in San Diego, shot by a dealer who'd been hiding in a closet. None of us had expected to survive to retirement. The nature of the work, the constant danger, the way drug dealers saw federal agents as the enemy who needed to be eliminated. But I'd survived, and now I was here, rebuilding motorcycles and dealing with HOA drama instead of cartel violence. It was a strange transition, but maybe that was okay. Maybe you didn't need life and death stakes to find purpose. Maybe fixing a vintage bike and standing up to a suburban bully was enough. Maybe small victories counted as much as big ones. The next morning, I rode the Triumph for the first time. The Nevada sunrise painted the desert in shades of orange and pink as I cruised down empty roads, the bike responding perfectly to every input. Wind rushed past my helmet, carrying away the last remnants of stress and conflict. This was freedom. This was peace. This was what I'd retired for. I rode for 2 hours, exploring back roads I'd never traveled, feeling the bike beneath me like an extension of my body. When I finally returned home, Robert Chen was waiting in my driveway, standing next to a newer model sedan. "Henry, got a minute?" he asked as I shut down the bike. "Sure." "What's up?" "The board voted last night, and we want to officially apologize for everything that happened with Brenda. We're also voting to eliminate about 70% of the current HOA regulations. Grass height requirements, trash bin visibility rules, most of the petty stuff she used to harass people. We're keeping the basics about maintaining properties and not creating nuisances, but we're giving homeowners their freedom back." "That's great, Robert. There's more. We want to refund your fines in full, and we'd like to offer you a position on the HOA board. We need people who understand fairness and accountability, people who won't abuse the authority." I considered it. 6 months ago, I would have said no immediately. I'd wanted nothing to do with community politics or neighborhood drama, but maybe Marcus was right about finding new purposes, and maybe helping shape a better, more reasonable HOA was worth the time investment. Can I think about it? Absolutely. Elections are in 2 months. Just let me know. After Robert left, I went into my workshop and finally put my DEA badge away. Not hidden, but properly stored in a drawer with my retirement paperwork, my final performance reviews, and the letters of commendation I'd received over the years. It was part of my history, but it didn't need to be part of my present. The Honda CB 750 needed attention next. I'd been neglecting it during the drama with Brenda, but now I had time and mental space to focus. The carburetor rebuild was complex, requiring patience and precision. Exactly the kind of work I needed. Hours passed in focused concentration. The sun tracked across the sky, visible through the workshop's high windows. My phone stayed silent. Nobody was harassing me, fining me, breaking into my building, or otherwise disturbing my peace. It was, I realized, exactly what I'd wanted when I retired. A quiet space to work on projects I cared about, free from the constant tension and danger of federal law enforcement. Dorothy Palmer brought me lunch around noon, a sandwich and homemade cookies that reminded me of my grandmother's baking. We sat in my workshop, talking about her son who died in Afghanistan, about her husband who'd passed away 3 years ago, about the quiet grief that came with losing the people who defined your life. "You seem lighter," she said as she was leaving. "Like a weight came off your shoulders." I feel lighter. For the first time since moving here, I feel like I made the right choice. This is home now. Good, because we need people like you in this neighborhood, people who stand up for what's right but don't go looking for fights. That's rare. After she left, I returned to the Honda, but my mind kept drifting to Robert's offer. A position on the HOA board. 6 months ago, it would have been unthinkable. Now, it felt like a reasonable way to give back, to help create the kind of community I wanted to live in. My phone rang around 4. Detective Williams. "Henry, wanted to update you on something. Brenda Hutchinson's psychological evaluation came back. Her therapist diagnosed her with several issues, including control anxiety and possible narcissistic personality traits. The good news is she's responding well to treatment and seems genuinely committed to change. The therapist thinks the arrest was actually good for her, forcing her to confront behaviors she'd been rationalizing for years. That is good news. Yeah. I wanted you to know because you handled this situation about as well as anyone could have. You held her accountable without being vindictive, and now she's getting the help she needs. That's a win all around. After the call ended, I sat in my workshop thinking about accountability and second chances. Brenda had committed crimes, violated people's privacy, abused her authority. She deserved consequences. But she also deserved the opportunity to become better, to address the underlying issues that had driven her behavior. That's what the justice system was supposed to do. Not just punish, but redirect. Help people find better versions of themselves. It didn't always work. In my DEA career, I'd seen plenty of dealers who went through the system and came out worse. But sometimes it did work. Sometimes people could change. The sun was setting when I finally finished with the Honda's carburetor. The bike wouldn't run for weeks yet, but progress was progress. I locked up the workshop, the new heavy-duty lock secure and unblemished, and walked across my yard to the house. Inside, I made dinner and settled on the couch with a beer and a book about motorcycle history. It was fully domestic, thoroughly civilian, completely removed from the world of federal law enforcement I'd inhabited for 15 years. And it was perfect. My phone buzzed one more time that evening. A text from Robert Chen. Forgot to mention the board is planning a neighborhood barbecue next month. Would love to see you there. Bring the Triumph if you want to show it off. I texted back agreeing to attend. A neighborhood barbecue. Meeting my neighbors in a casual setting, showing off my restored motorcycle, being part of a community. These were the things I'd missed during my DEA career, always moving, always undercover, always maintaining distance for operational security. Now I could have them. Now I could be Henry Kovacs, motorcycle enthusiast and retired federal agent, instead of Special Agent Kovacs, always on duty, always alert, always ready for violence. The transition hadn't been smooth, and the incident with Brenda had been an unwelcome reminder of my old life. But maybe that was okay. Maybe you never completely left your past behind. You just learned to integrate it with your present. The next morning, I called Robert Chen and accepted the position on the HOA board. He sounded genuinely pleased, promising that the new board would be nothing like Brenda's regime. They wanted to facilitate community, not control it. They wanted to maintain property values through positive initiatives, not punitive fines. They wanted Desert Springs Estates to be a place where people wanted to live, not a place they escaped from at the first opportunity. When do I start? I asked. Officially, after the elections in 2 months, but you can come to the next board meeting if you want to see how we operate. It's pretty boring compared to DEA work, I imagine. Boring sounds perfect. I spent the next 2 months settling into my new life. The Triumph became my daily rider, carrying me through Henderson and the surrounding desert on long, contemplative rides. The Honda progressed slowly but steadily toward completion. And I started volunteering at the local high school, teaching basic mechanics to students who were more interested in their phones than carburetors, but occasionally showed sparks of genuine curiosity. The neighborhood barbecue arrived on a perfect October afternoon, temperature in the mid-70s, sky impossibly blue. I rode the Triumph to the community center, parking it prominently where people could admire it. Dorothy was already there, helping set up tables and greeting neighbors. Robert was manning a grill, cooking burgers and hot dogs with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed the task. I recognized several faces from the coffee meeting at Dorothy's house. Frank, the retired schoolteacher. Tom and Jennifer, the young couple. Margaret, the elderly widow. We'd formed an accidental alliance through our shared experience with Brenda, and now we were becoming actual friends. New neighbors introduced themselves, people I'd never met during my first months in Desert Springs. They'd heard about the situation with Brenda, and several thanked me for standing up to her. One woman, a nurse named Patricia, said she'd been planning to move because of the harassment but changed her mind after Brenda's arrest. "You saved this neighborhood," she said. "You should know that." I didn't feel like a savior. I felt like someone who defended himself and accidentally helped others in the process. But I accepted the thanks gracefully, understanding that perception mattered as much as intention. The barbecue lasted into the evening, the desert sunset providing a spectacular backdrop. Someone brought out a guitar, and impromptu music started. Kids ran around playing games while adults talked and laughed. It was thoroughly normal, wonderfully mundane, exactly what community was supposed to be. Robert found me as things were winding down. "So, what do you think? Does Desert Springs feel like home yet?" I watched Dorothy teaching a group of kids some kind of hand-clapping game. Watched Frank discussing lawn care with a younger homeowner. Watched Tom and Jennifer dancing to the guitar music, completely unself-conscious in their happiness. "Yeah," I said, "it does." The official HOA board meeting 2 weeks later was indeed boring, just as Robert had promised. We discussed budget allocations for landscaping the common areas. We reviewed a proposal for upgrading the community center's kitchen. We debated whether to install additional lighting along the walking paths. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, nothing that triggered any instinct developed over 15 years of federal law enforcement. It was perfect. After the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. "I heard from Brenda's attorney. She wanted me to pass along a message. She's sorry for everything, and she hopes you're enjoying your workshop without interference. She also wanted you to know that she's getting help and doing better." "That's good to hear." She asked if she could apologize to you in person at some point. I told her attorney I'd relay the message, but that it was entirely up to you. I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Brenda Hutchinson ever again. But another part, the part that had spent 15 years trying to make bad situations better, thought maybe accepting her apology would help both of us move forward. Tell her attorney that if she wants to apologize, she can come by on a Saturday afternoon. I'll be in my workshop. But make it clear that this is voluntary on my part, and if she shows up looking for anything other than offering a genuine apology, I won't be receptive. Robert nodded. "I'll pass that along." Brenda showed up 3 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. I was working on the Honda when I heard a car pull into my driveway. The security cameras, which I'd kept active, showed her getting out of an older sedan, not the white Lexus she'd driven before. She looked different. Thinner, more casual in jeans and a sweater, her hair grown out from that aggressive bob into something softer. I met her at the workshop door, not inviting her inside. "Henry," she said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you had every right to refuse." "What do you want, Brenda?" "To apologize, sincerely and without excuses. I broke into your property, violated your privacy, tried to intimidate you, and then tried to frame you for assault when you fought back. That was all wrong. It was criminal and it was cruel and you didn't deserve any of it." She looked directly at me, her eyes clear of the aggressive certainty I'd seen before. "I've been in therapy 3 times a week since the arrest. I've been diagnosed with some control issues that stem from my divorce and feeling powerless in my own life. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it helps explain it. I was trying to feel powerful and important by controlling other people, and I hurt a lot of innocent people in the process. Including yourself," I said, "especially myself. I destroyed my reputation, lost my position, got a criminal record, and worst of all, I became someone I'm ashamed of. The judge told me to figure out who I want to be. I'm working on that. I'm volunteering at a homeless shelter, doing my community service hours there. I'm learning to help people instead of controlling them. It's hard, but it's better. I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or false remorse. But I'd interviewed hundreds of criminals during my DEA career, and I'd gotten pretty good at distinguishing genuine regret from tactical performance. Brenda seemed genuine. "I accept your apology," I said, "and I hope you continue getting better. But Brenda, if you ever come onto my property uninvited again, if you ever harass me or anyone else in this neighborhood, I won't give you another chance. The next time, I'll pursue the maximum penalties. You understand?" "I understand, and thank you for holding me accountable and for giving me this chance to apologize. Not everyone would." She left without asking to see the workshop or trying to extend the conversation, just a simple apology and departure. I watched her drive away, then return to the Honda. My hands were steady, my mind clear. That chapter was truly closed now. The months that followed were exactly what I'd hoped retirement would be. Quiet mornings in the workshop, long rides through the desert on the Triumph, teaching mechanics at the high school twice a week, attending HOA board meetings that were productive but unstressful, having coffee with Dorothy and the other neighbors who'd become friends. Marcus Richardson visited for a weekend, and we rode our motorcycles through Red Rock Canyon, talking about everything and nothing. He approved of my new life, said I looked healthier and more relaxed than I had in years. We didn't talk much about the DEA or our former careers. Those days were behind us, integrated into who we were but no longer defining us. I finished the Honda CB 750 in March, 7 months after starting it. The bike was spectacular, a perfect restoration that started immediately and ran like the engineering masterpiece it had been when new in 1969. I took it for a test ride through Henderson and into the desert, pushing it harder than I'd pushed the Triumph, feeling the power and precision that had made the CB 750 legendary. On the ride back, I detoured past Dorothy's house. She was in her yard again, always in her yard, tending the gardens that were her therapy and purpose. I pulled over and showed her the finished bike. Her face lit up with genuine joy. "It's beautiful, Henry. Your best work yet. Thanks. I'm thinking about selling it and starting a new project. Maybe a Ducati or a vintage BMW. You should keep it. You put your heart into that restoration. It deserves to be ridden and enjoyed, not sold." She was probably right. The CB 750 represented more than mechanical restoration. It represented my own rebuilding, my transition from broken and shot-up federal agent to functional civilian finding peace in a desert suburb. Selling it would be like selling part of that journey. "I'll think about it," I said. That evening, I sat in my workshop with both bikes, the Triumph and the Honda, and thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been in physical therapy, my body broken, my career over, my future uncertain. 6 months ago, I'd been fighting with a HOA president and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake moving to Henderson. Now, I had a community. I had purpose. I had peace. The PTSD hadn't disappeared, the bullet wound still ached when the weather changed, and I still occasionally woke from nightmares about the Albuquerque raid. But those were manageable now. They were part of me, not all of me. My phone rang. "Detective Williams. Henry, quick update. Brenda Hutchinson successfully completed her first year of probation. Her probation officer says she's been exemplary. Just thought you'd want to know. That's good news. Thanks for letting me know." "No problem. And Henry, that security camera system you installed saved this case." Clean evidence, no ambiguity, airtight prosecution. You'd make a hell of a detective if you ever get bored with retirement. I laughed. I think I'm good with motorcycles and boring HOA meetings, but I appreciate the compliment. After hanging up, I realized I was smiling. A year ago, talking to cops about criminal cases would have triggered anxiety and memories I'd rather forget. Now, it was just a pleasant conversation with someone I respected. That was growth. That was healing. The neighborhood barbecue in spring was even better than the fall one had been. More people attended. The weather was perfect, and someone had hired an actual band instead of relying on amateur guitar playing. I brought both motorcycles, parking them side by side, and spent the afternoon talking about restoration techniques with neighbors who'd never cared about motorcycles before, but were curious now. Robert approached me with a beer and a satisfied expression. Property values in Desert Springs are up 12% since last year. Crime is down. Resident satisfaction surveys are the highest they've ever been. Turns out people like living in a neighborhood where the HOA helps instead of harasses. Imagine that. The board wants to thank you officially. We're putting together a plaque or something. In recognition of service to the community type thing. I know it's cheesy, but it matters to people. You don't have to do that. We want to. You changed this place, Henry. You stood up when no one else would, and you did it the right way. That deserves recognition. The plaque was presented at the next HOA meeting. A simple brass plate mounted on wood with my name and a brief inscription. It was cheesy, as Robert had warned, but it also meant something. Recognition that I'd contributed positively, that I'd helped build something better. That was worth more than any commendation I'd received during my DEA career. I mounted the plaque in my workshop, next to the drawer where my badge was stored. 2 different phases of my life, both representing service, both involving standing up for what was right. The badge was my past. The plaque was my present. And somewhere in the balance between them was my future. The Honda CB 750 stayed in my garage, never sold, ridden regularly through the Nevada desert. The Triumph remained my primary bike, but the Honda was special. It represented the first project I'd completed in my new life, the first thing I'd built instead of torn down. Dorothy Palmer became one of my closest friends, the kind of unexpected relationship that retirement made possible. We had coffee twice a week, talking about her son and my former career, about loss and purpose and finding meaning in the ordinary. She understood veteran trauma in ways civilians usually didn't, having watched her son struggle with it before his death in Afghanistan. "You're doing better," she told me one morning over coffee. "When you first moved here, you had this tension. Like you were always ready for something bad to happen. Now you're more relaxed, more present. Therapy helps, so does not getting shot at regularly," she smiled. "And having a purpose. The teaching, the board work, the restorations. You found ways to contribute without putting yourself in danger." That's wisdom, Henry. A lot of veterans never figure that out. The seasons cycled through their Nevada variations. Scorching summers where I worked in the air-conditioned workshop and rode in the early morning before the heat became dangerous. Mild winters where the desert bloomed briefly and beautifully. Springs and falls that were absolutely perfect, making me grateful I'd chosen Nevada for my retirement. The high school shop class grew under my volunteer instruction. What had started as me helping out a few days a month turned into a regular commitment. I taught basic mechanics, tool safety, and problem solving. But more importantly, I taught persistence and attention to detail and pride in doing quality work. The same skills I'd learned in the DEA applied to a completely different context. One of my students, a quiet kid named Marcus, no relation to my former supervisor, showed exceptional aptitude. He was a foster kid with a difficult background, the kind of teenager who could go either way depending on who influenced him. I took him under my wing, let him help with restorations in my workshop on weekends, taught him advanced techniques. 2 years after I'd started teaching, Marcus won a regional vocational skills competition. He was offered a full scholarship to a technical college. At the awards ceremony, he thanked me in his acceptance speech, said I'd given him a future he'd never imagined was possible. Dorothy was there and she cried through the whole thing. Afterwards, she hugged me and whispered, "This is what my son wanted to do when he came home, teach and mentor and help kids. You're doing it for him. Thank you." That night, sitting in my workshop with the lights low and the desert night quiet around me, I thought about purpose and legacy. I'd spent 15 years as a DEA agent, and I'd done good work. I'd removed poison from communities, saved lives, upheld the law. But I'd also lost partners, taken bullets, and eventually been broken by the violence and trauma. Now I was teaching mechanics and rebuilding motorcycles and serving on a HOA board. Smaller stakes, less drama, nothing that would make headlines or earn commendations. But Marcus had a future now. My neighborhood was healthier and happier. Dorothy had a friend who understood her loss. These were real impacts, meaningful contributions. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was more than enough. My DEA badge stayed in its drawer, honored but retired. My workshop expanded, additional tools and equipment appearing as I took on more complex restoration projects. And my life in Henderson, Nevada became fully and completely my life. Not a transition, not a temporary stop, but home. 3 years after the incident with Brenda Hutchinson, I ran into her at a grocery store. She was with an older man who I assumed was a new boyfriend or maybe just a friend. She saw me, hesitated, then approached. "Henry, it's good to see you. Brenda, how are you doing?" "Better, really better. I finished probation last year. I'm working part-time at a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people reintegrate, using my legal background for something positive." "That's great. I'm glad you found something meaningful. I heard you're teaching at the high school, and that one of your students got a scholarship. That's wonderful." We talked for a few more minutes, cordial but not intimate. We'd never be friends, but we weren't enemies either. She'd made mistakes, faced consequences, and apparently learned from them. That was all I could reasonably ask. Walking out of the grocery store, I thought about redemption and second chances. The criminal justice system didn't always get it right, but sometimes it did. Sometimes people could change, could become better versions of themselves. Brenda seemed to be one of those people. And I was too, in my own way. 3 years ago, I'd been a damaged veteran struggling to find purpose after a violent career. Now I was a teacher, a board member, a restorer of vintage motorcycles, a friend and neighbor. Not a federal agent anymore, but something else. Something better suited to this phase of my life. The desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors as I drove home, the mountains dark silhouettes against orange and purple gradients. Henderson sprawled around me, an improbable city in an unlikely place, but home nonetheless. My house appeared as I turned onto my street, the workshop visible behind it, both structures solid and permanent in mine. Dorothy was in her yard, waving as I passed. Robert's house showed lights in the windows, family inside living their lives. Margaret's porch furniture, in whatever color she chose, decorated her front steps. The neighborhood was alive and healthy, people living without fear of harassment or arbitrary rules. I pulled into my driveway, walked through my house to the back door, and crossed the yard to my workshop. Inside, the Triumph and Honda gleamed under the lights, mechanical art, functional beauty, testaments to patience and skill and finding meaning in small things. This was retirement. This was peace. This was the life I'd earned through 15 years of service and sacrifice. And standing there in my workshop, surrounded by tools and motorcycles and the quiet satisfaction of work well done, I realized I was genuinely, completely happy. Henry Kovacs, former DEA special agent, retired on disability, shot twice in the line of duty, relocated to Henderson, Nevada to rebuild vintage motorcycles and himself. The case of the HOA president who broke into his workshop was closed, resolved not with violence but with accountability and eventual redemption. And life, in all its ordinary and extraordinary moments, continued in the desert suburb he now called home. The story could have ended differently. Brenda could have been worse. The confrontation could have escalated. The criminal charges could have destroyed her completely. But this ending, with its measured justice and tentative hope for change, felt more real. Life rarely provided perfect resolutions, but sometimes it offered good enough ones. And good enough, I'd learned, was actually pretty damn good.